Hope is a fickle, dangerous thing. It steals your focus and aims it towards the possibilities instead of keeping it where it belongs, on the probabilities. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. We're on episode 126 with myself, Ramia Ahmedin, Jacob Shemansky,
Hello.
And technical producer Nasreen Abdel Majid. I loved today's quote. I think I made some physical pain noises when I first read it, Jacob. You picked it. Where is it from? Who wrote it?
This is from Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I think on the surface, it's a plea for pragmatism in the face of hope.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what it really is about the complexities of hope, because it can lead you astray while it also keeps you going. It does both. It's a
where do you
fickle
draw
mistress.
the line, right?
Yeah.
Because we can easily get into the conversation around optimism and pessimism. But is hope really the same as optimistic, or is it, fake optimism?
I think hope is grasping for optimism. That's
but
my
then it
distinction.
sounds desperate, and that sounds dangerous also.
Hope can be desperate.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Anyways,
Also,
why did you get that
find it?
reaction from this quote? You said you felt
I don't know.
physically
I just
ill.
Yeah, because it kind of feels like a reality check or a slap in the face this way, right? You're tiptoeing the line of hope. Do you know when you've now just are starting to believe in falsities? Because when you think back to probability, I almost think just gambling. Like, you know what's going to happen. You know that this is either for you or against you, or with you or against you. And I think that the lines of hope are way more gray than that.
Yeah, this quote is your friend grabbing you by the shoulders and shaking you and saying, yo, get real.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I'm doing it again. I'm having it again. Same reaction.
Moving on. We need a distraction. What do we want to talk about today?
Okay, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. On today's episode, we got two convos for you. Number one, the romantasy genre. Okay, if you're like me and you're like, I don't know what this is, it is a very popular genre, I guess subgenre, mesh genre has blown up. It's blown up in the wild. And Booktok is very responsible for this. This is what would you even call that? A category on TikTok? Are we calling them categories now?
A category is it's a certain corner of TikTok. They're tucked over there. They're doing their own thing. But it's definitely blown up in that section of TikTok.
Yeah, and it's super fun. I love Booktok. But anyways, what is it about this genre that's made it so irresistible to its ravenous fan base? We're going to find out what the appeal is. We're going to find out why it's blowing up now and why it's Booktok that's highly influential for how big it's getting. And Karen, McKay, and Theresa Power from CELA are going to join us for that chat. Plus, in the second half, we're going to chat with Sarah Hillis to talk about the merits and pitfalls of celebrity narrators, because we've had our fair share just on the show talking about reviewing books by celebrity narrators, not just the authors, but the celebrities themselves narrating / authorating. And we're going to talk about sometimes why that works, sometimes why it doesn't, and are we putting too much pressure on our celebrity besties? So let's start with Romantasy. Yeah, Karen McKay, Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access. They join us once a month pretty much. Teresa's the content and access librarian, and Karen is the communications manager. Hello, both of you. Welcome back.
Hello.
It's nice to have you on. Who wants to take on the definition of romantasy? Not it.
Not it.
Not it.
Oh,
Theresa,
man,
you're up.
really? Would you?
Teresa was late coming on, so we kind of appointed you when you weren't here.
If I say it's a combo of romance and fantasy, would you hate me?
That's way too basic.
What else do I have? So romantasy, I as a collection development kind of person, started coming across this term more and more, I'd say, in the last year or so. But it's really interesting to actually read that romantasy was first posted on Urban Dictionary as early as 2008, actually. So many, many years ago, that's been
That's
a
been a
while, this idea
while.
of romantasy.
Huh.
Um, uh, yeah, so it's been around for a while. But really, like as you kind of alluded to, it's really exploded as a genre, and it's really thanks to social media, and to Booktok and TikTok, and I think also the demographic as well that finds themselves on TikTok as well, that have really made it blow up. So, at its basics, yes, it's a combo of romance and fantasy, but it's also a little bit more specific than that. It's fantasy in that it has world building, battles between good and evil, dragons, fairies, all of those good things. But then it also combines popular romance tropes, so things that we're also very familiar with. So enemies to lovers plot is very big in romantasy. Explosive sex scenes are also smut steam, uh, spice is what people have called it. All seem to be
What?
elements of romantasy. And the books are really geared towards this new adult uh, age group. They've always been readers, but this is more of a publishing marketing kind of ploy, and it's readers,
New
new
adult,
adult.
or is that a version of
No,
young
young
adult?
adult is
Oh,
typically up until about age 18, and new adult is what people call readers in their late teens, so 18 and above into their 20s as well. So yeah. So
got it.
romantasy is really for those folks. But one thing I also find super interesting about romantasy is just about where many of the more popular authors kind of come from for inspiration for these books. And uh, we found in talking about this, Karen and I, that the more popular authors all seem to have been born around the same time. They're all in and around their 40s now, so they were really raised on kind of the same kinds of stories. And Sarah J. Maas, for example, her first story was based on the Cinderella story. So she took the romantic elements of that, but really gave Cinderella an edge. So I think we also see that in romantasy as well, is that you have this, those romantic elements that we grew up with, but also this empowerment of the main characters who are female. So they become powerful heroines in their stories, and they have more agency in their narrative than, what they were given in the past.
What I find interesting is that the demographic for the main demographic that's interested in romantasy seems to be fairly narrow. It seems
Hmm.
to be almost predominantly like young women from like 18 to 25. And I think that makes a lot of sense considering that this blew up on Booktok and there's a lot of crossover between those two demographics. I think it's pretty fair to say that the vast majority of people who read romantasy are also on TikTok.
And I think people are really quick to call it chick lit, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
contemporary romance readers also fall into that same demographic, that same place on the internet as well. It's very, very popular. But I think that we can see superficially what romantasy is about, but there's also, I think, some more interesting elements to it. This, giving these popular kind of tropes a bit of an edge, or sisterhood and girlhood also seems to be a big factor in romantasy books as well. So I think these are also really interesting things to explore.
And one thing I've noticed in reading a lot of reviews for romantasy books is that the audience really seems to embrace these tropes, these like enemies to lovers and um, arranged marriage lovers and stuff like that. Like they love that stuff. It's not that having a trope is bad, like we would typically say. It's just you have to put a twist on it add some spice. The other kind of spice, or two types of spice here.
And if you think about like these authors that grew up in the 90s and like it's just such it's just so common, you know what I mean, in movies and in television as well. So I can see where they're kind of drawing from. It's not a negative trope. It's such a familiar one. You know, there's some comfort I think in its familiarity too. If you were, you know, ever if you grew up in the 90s and you know, saw the movies and television shows that kind of worked around those premises.
So, Karen, tell us about your exposure into romantasy. I think that what I'm most curious about is why we create so much of this subgenre. And we talked about it, or, you know, combine genres together and make it into its own thing. Is it literally because of fan base? Because we know that people will eat it up once you've kind of locked it into its own compartment? Is there more to it? Theresa, you broke it down very well, like the elements of romantasy. But like, there's really a huge part of me that's like, but is this necessary?
Well, I think that there's sort of two reasons for it. One is probably from the publisher's end. It opens up a new avenue for marketing for them. It helps
Marketing.
them, yeah, yeah. It helps them with you know, direct communications with the target audience for this. And I think the other thing is it's a little bit, for lack of a better word, maybe a little bit tribal. Like, these are our sisters. These are the stories we want to read. I find it interesting that the cultural influences for romantasy are often sort of young, intelligent, powerful women who also want to be, you know, to have something beyond just the non-romantic story as part of their reading. So, you know, this is the generation that grew up on Harry Potter, Hermione, Marvel movies, Taylor Swift, Buffy, like those characters that have a life outside romance, but also want some romance in their life. So I think that that's part of why this has sort of gelled into its own subgenre that way. That it makes it easier for people to find these kinds of books, which is really, I mean, that's what genres are all about. So I think that that's a really interesting piece of it. And when I was doing a bit of research into how this came about and what the difference is between romantasy and just a fantasy novel with a romantic subplot, the definition that I read is that that a fantasy novel with romance has sort of a larger external conflict that extends beyond the romance, whereas the romantasy, the conflict tends to be tightly wound up in the romance. So as Theresa said, you know, there's some forbidden love, there's love triangles, there's, you know, enemies to lovers, those sorts of ideas. And so, you know, I think that this probably meets the need for somewhat lighter reading. Like, it's not necessarily a deep,
almost?
yeah, kind of, but you know, maybe it's got a little bit more spice in both meanings of the word, for readers who want characters, like strong female characters. And so I think this is a really interesting genre. It does sort of lend itself to the question about how many subgenres do we need to have, and when does that limit a book versus not limit a book?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Like,
I
are
think that's
people
something.
writing to fit into this genre now? Because you can see the benefit, right? Obviously, there's so many plus sides to just knowing that this is a thing, knowing that there's enough people who are totally looking for this and this is their kind of main go-to, and then say, I'm going to write for this audience. But it also kind of makes me think, like, does it get too rigid? Like, does it start feeling so cookie cutter that we're like, you know, it's kind of a fad, more of a fad than it is like a longevity situation for genres like this. It's, you know, just it's trending at the moment. I mean, Theresa said it's been out since '08, so that's kind of a
Yeah,
long time, but
but
still.
it is sort of trending more predominantly right now.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
I think that there's some space for the category to grow. Like, when Teresa and I were chatting about it yesterday, we were looking at what kind of elements of diversity are in this category, and right now there's not much. It's mostly white
Yeah.
women writing
Mm.
for young women within a certain age demographic, but there's not a lot of LGBTQ. There's not a lot of diversity in terms of race or ethnocultural kinds of characters or authors even. So there's space for that to grow, and I think that we'll probably see that. I mean, just the genre's just sort of developed in the last, I don't know, I would say what, Theresa, 2 years
If that,
maybe?
honestly, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that there's space for it to grow, but I don't know. I do think that it will maybe start to decline, but it's almost a natural evolution from a lot of the YA stuff that we've seen into slightly more adult but similar kinds of fantasy world building kinds of reading. So it's actually an interesting kind of phenomenon to me.
So who are the big names right now that are making this genre blow up? Like, if I wanted to get started in romantasy, whose books am I looking at?
The two biggest ones I would say are Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca
Mm-hmm.
Yarros. Those are the two that seem to have really populated the genre, grew the genre, and are really the ones who have a lot of success because of Booktok and social media. I think that they're super popular because of those people there that love their books and talk about their books and keep them employed, basically. So I would say that those two authors are probably the two biggest ones now. And if you wanted to get a good idea of the genre, you would probably want to start there.
It's interesting. Rebecca Yarros' book Fourth Wing won the Goodreads Best Romantasy category for 2023, so last year. And it won by 10 times as many votes as the second on the list. Like it
Not
was
even close.
not even close. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
three something
Wow.
million to 30 or 300,000. Like just blew the competition out of the water. So
But see, I think this is another case of the demographics of Goodreads being very
Yeah,
reflective of the
absolutely.
demographics of romantasy. Mm.
absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of these books are written as a series of, 5, 6, 7 kinds of books. And again, I kind of go back to who's reading these books and what did they grow up on, right? Like that's the Harry Potter generation. And even, there's lots of examples of these authors having big book release parties, like independent bookstores holding parties and selling tickets. And I mean, that's really a Harry Potter phenomenon. I don't ever recall books being released like that before Harry Potter with that kind of fanfare. Um, and these are the readers who often want their authors to be almost celebrities. These readers are the same ones that made Rupi Kaur into a superstar, right? Like she sells out venues just around poetry, and so I think that this category and these readers really love an experience and love to have their authors be almost like superstars themselves. So I think that there's that interplay that you don't find in some of the other genres.
I'll add that Sarah Moss is a real rock star too. Like she's got 1.6 million followers on Instagram, and at her book launches, she's like wearing Gucci and
Yes,
like
I
super tall
yes.
boots with stilettos.
I,
stilettos.
Karen and I were commenting about the Gucci before. It's definitely an aesthetic, but I would also say so indicative of a generation. Like the
Mm.
way that we celebritize people, it's just like people online. It's just kind of wild how people will post things on Instagram or on TikTok, and they're like, oh my gosh, like I woke up and I had 13 million views, and all of a sudden you're a celebrity that needs to output content on a regular basis to keep it up. So it's just
Right.
I think that idea of like now authors becoming celebrities is just so typical of a generation, really.
And very involved online too.
Very,
Like sometimes
yeah.
I'm on Reddit and somebody posts like a review of a book, and the first comment is going to be from the author saying, "Oh, thanks, you're too kind."
Oh, and then there's been cases
Like,
of authors like of shaming other authors online, and
yes,
yeah,
yeah,
behind
yeah.
the scenes that you don't know it's that author. Yeah. So
Oh, it's like an old school rap
It really
beef, except
is.
it's authors.
True.
I wonder
Yeah.
with Romantasy as well if there's like almost an element of like fan fiction that's part of it. Like fan fiction in the sense,
You almost got to plug that right in to the intention,
yeah,
no? Because fantasy, it has so much fan fiction, so much
yeah,
room for
and
it.
just the way that, you know, you're kind of pulling on these characters that you grew up with, whether it's like Hermione or if it's like Buffy or I mentioned Cinderella with Sarah J. Maas and her first book, which was based on the Cinderella story. If there's almost like that kind of, yeah, or like maybe an homage, but I rather think it's like fan fiction kind of in a way, but maybe better fan fiction for sure.
Yeah. And I don't know. To me, because this kind of thing is still very much a informative situation. Like, you know, Jacob, you read a lot of fantasy, so I feel like you have just dabbled into this side of things. You, if not read about it, you've leaned into the understanding of it. Whereas for me, I'm thinking like, wow, this is quite a phenomenon. Let's keep breaking it down, you know, why or how, and how do you keep it going? But with all of this interaction or room for interaction in all these different ways, I can tell that people just kind of melt right into it.
Well, I have a theory as to why fantasy and romance kind of merged at this point in time. Bear with me, okay? So, for the longest time, things that young women and like girls enjoyed was like relentlessly and ruthlessly mocked by mainstream society. Think about like Justin Bieber and the Twilight Saga and One Direction. Like, if girls like that stuff, like mainstream society was just ruthless with you. And that includes romance too. Like, it was always a bit of a naughty secret, especially if it was smut, you know? Like, you wouldn't talk about it publicly because people would probably make fun of you, let's be real. Right. But there's been, over the past, like, decade, I'd say, like, people are a lot more open about it. There's like, yeah, I read smut. What are you going to do about it? And Unapologetic, exactly. And fantasy, for the longest time, was very male-oriented. Like, let's not pretend it wasn't. Like, in Lord of the Rings, there were only 3 female characters, and none of them ever talked to each other. And when J.K. Rowling came up with the first Harry Potter book, her publisher, instead of making her pen name Joanne Rowling, they made it J.K. Rowling, so that because they thought that they didn't want that audiences wouldn't read a book from a female author. This is a bit of a stretch, but listen. I used to play a game called The Movies. And in this game, you control like a movie studio, and you produce movies, you manage your actors, your directors, and choose what kind of movies you want to make. There was a really cool mechanic that let you that basically influenced what genres audiences would want. So, for example, like during the Great Depression, like people weren't in a laughing mood, so comedies wouldn't do well. And in the late 60s and like to the mid 70s, sci-fi was super popular because the moon landing had just happened. Point is, what happens in the world shapes the tastes of audiences. And what happened in fantasy in like the early 2000s was that I think people were really over this escapism of fantasy, and they wanted something more gritty and realistic. And that's why Grimdark came out. And Grimdark was big for like 15 years, from like the 2000s all the way to like 2015, and then it kind of had a falling out. So 2 things happen at once. In the fantasy world, people wanted cozy fantasy again. And then women were much more open and honest about their love of romance. So those 2 things put together, romantasy becomes a thing because, one, people wanted cozy fantasy, and there was like never a bigger demand for escapist romance.
Yeah. I mean, just anecdotally, you can kind of follow this trajectory, right? On what people need, where people are going to, that kind of, there's so much serious stuff we need to learn about, but then I got to get back to this kind of comfort, familiar escapism, as you say, which makes a lot of sense.
And romance and fantasy are escapism, without a doubt.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're not trying to make a big
Inertly.
point about the world. They're
Oh
not
my
trying to
gosh.
teach you anything. It's pure
No,
escapism.
so lighthearted,
Mhm.
so cookie cutter. Well, to oversimplify, but you know what I mean. Like, there's a formula. It's formulaic, right? When we talk like Nora Roberts with all her romance stuff, like where you know what you're getting. You know what you're getting. It's part of that comfort to kind of go there and say, yeah, that's what I want. Like this chill experience of a book right now, and you see it not just with books, right? Like you see it all over the place, different platforms.
I mean, personally, I like the escapism. Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, who doesn't?
Yeah. The thing is, like, the question mark still for me is like, what do you turn to something very specific, like Romantasy, when you're looking for that escapism, or are we just doing it and kind of unaware of the conversation around it?
Well, I think this
'Cause
is
it's so
where
popular.
the social media comes in, right? Like some friend will
Yeah,
tell another
influence.
friend,
Yeah.
yeah, or you'll see it on social media, or my kids will say to me, "Oh, mom, you should read this book," whatever the book might be, and it's just because there's so much capacity in Booktok for creating these different demands, or in social media in general. I think that's how part of the reason that they become so popular is they get passed from person to person, right? From friend to friend. But I also want to come back to an idea about just escapism. And, I think that we all right now need to have something that is cozy, that is a little sentimental, that is a little bit mushy, for lack of a better word. I mean, I was spending some time with my dad, and
Perfect.
he watches the women's channel Christmas things, and he just keeps watching them. I mean, he's an 86-year-old man, and he loves them because they're soft, for lack of a better word. Like, they're just easy, and you don't have to think beyond just what's the words in front of you on the page and the story. There's not necessarily a lot of depth that you need to go into. You can find the themes in any writing, but it's just a comfort. And it'll be interesting for me to see if the genre sort of expands beyond just young women. Like if we start to see it normalizing in with male readers, with LGBTQ readers, especially if they come out with content that's relevant. It would just be interesting to see how this category kind of grows.
Or plateaus, or what
Yes.
other categories we can get out of this category, right? Like there's just a lot of that. We're making it more and more niche on so many levels, whether it be age groups or content or diversity, right? Like the representation of characters and settings and things like that. It's really like we're able to just hashtag the heck out of things nowadays, which is pretty interesting to kind of follow. Whatever you need to find, however specific it is, you will find it out there.
Exactly.
Following.
I don't want to throw Romantasy under the bus, though. I don't know if that's quite what we're doing here, but I do want to give it due credit for what it's trying to do, which is, to incorporate not just like the softer, more human elements of people, of like wanting to be loved or to have like a partner or whatever. But also that there's this element of like girlhood and sisterhood that seems to be like an important piece to this. And, if we're speaking to like the state of the world, banding together, for to survive seems like a very human thing to want to do, especially amongst your sisters,
You talk about your sisters or like girlhood. Do you mean from like the characters in the book's perspective or from the fan base's perspective?
I mean, from the way that the characters have been written, I suppose, if that's
Right.
Oh, I was thinking fan.
you know
could be
what?
both.
Well, I think it
think
is
both.
both actually, because if you look at the way that people are congregating online, for sure, there's like a sisterhood being built
Exactly.
around this.
And making it okay to pick up
Yeah,
stuff
absolutely.
like this.
I mean, I think that the
Absolutely.
romance genre forever has been maligned by people as less than of a genre to read versus like, something big and
Yeah.
manly like history or, like whatever. You know, so you know what I mean? But like the
I love that.
comparison is definitely made, and people have felt not confident to want to be like, I'm a romance reader. That's what I love. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people are a lot more
Yeah.
open about it. I found a
Yeah.
really good description of what Sarah J. Maas's series are like. I really like this one. So it's a beautiful blending of a trio of things. It's the poetic romanticism of a Taylor Swift album, the extraordinary world building of the Harry Potter series, and the jaw-dropping crossovers
Yes.
of the Marvel series.
And the Marvels
Oh.
thing is actually really interesting to think about, because if I'm interpreting this right in her books, there's actually crossover of characters between her series, I believe. So like they're doing this whole Marvel cinematic, bringing all the different individual superheroes and like kind of crisscrossing them together.
That is very Marvel-esque. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I can only imagine
This is when
how
it's
much
done right?
Yeah, exactly. I can only imagine how
This is
much
what we're aiming
shipping there is in the fan bases, right?
Gotta be.
Well, that's the whole idea of the term, right? They basically shipped the term to get us to romantasy. I just want to go back to one of Theresa's earlier points, and I don't mean to be throwing this genre under the bus at all. I do think that it's got a really interesting combination of strong female characters who,
Yes.
are feminist to some degree, like just that they're kind of down with the patriarchy. We're going to make our own decisions, do our own things. Combined with the romance, which I think, young women probably really, it really appeals to them because that's how they are in their own life, right? They want to be strong and capable and independent and able to make their own decisions and create their own worlds. And they still want a partner to lean on and to share that with. And so, I think that's probably part of it as well, is that this melding of these two genres are more representative of what young women today are thinking about or feeling, whether they're readers of this genre or not. They want to have it more, a more complete character, a more complete life. And this starts to get them there, these kinds of stories.
You got to give the
Women
people what they
it
want.
all.
Yeah.
They do.
Wow, this was a deep dive. Thank you so much, guys.
Our pleasure. It's always so great to talk to you.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Stick with us after the break. Celebrity narrators, yay or nay? Sarah Hillis is joining us for that conversation. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. We'll be right back. Welcome back to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Shamansky here with Rami Amuthan. Before the break, we were talking about romantasy and how that genre blew up recently. That was with the folks from CELA, the Center for Equitable Library Access. But right now, let's bring in Sarah Hillis, because we want to talk about celebrity narrations. What's up, Sarah?
Hey, how
Hot
you
topic.
guys doing?
Yeah, hot topics. Why did you want to bring this up? Like, did something happen?
Well, I just think I was just skimming through the Audie nominations. I actually don't know the date of the Audies, but it must be in March. It usually is. And there's a whole bunch of celebrity narrated books in the nomination categories, and just a whole bunch of different categories. I can't even name them all because there's just so many. A lot of them are narrated by author. There's a category for narrated by author, of course, and then just a couple of them, like Meryl Streep, for example, is narrated for Anne Patchett's book, Tom Lake. And I didn't think of Meryl Streep as a narrator, but apparently she did this one. So
Tom
cool,
Lake was
you know.
recommended before the break as well
Yeah,
by Karen
cool.
McKay.
Everybody seems to like it. Yeah. So yeah, I just thought I'd look at, in the interest of being a bit different and trying to what can we talk about narration? Well, what is it to be a celebrity narrator? What I mean by that is a narrator that has already been a celebrity somewhere else, and they're brought in either because their book is by them ostensibly, or their book is like suited to their talents, whatever, or it fits with their celebrity status or
Right.
whatever kind of thing. Yeah, so
We're calling these celebrity narrated books, but really it's mostly actors.
Yeah, it's pretty much
Right.
actors.
And
Pretty much.
Yeah, we have a couple
think
clips
singers.
here. Yeah, we have some singers,
Well, but
singing
Dolly-
really is acting though.
Dolly Parton has been an actor too.
That's true.
Bono, I don't know if he's ever acted in anything.
Yeah.
He's a performance artist though.
Yeah,
right?
he's
I
okay.
think it's like
Yeah.
he's a performer.
Wow, we
right?
are really
Okay.
nitpicking the heck out of this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Celebrity.
Yeah.
Back to celebrities.
So so for I mean, I think there are a couple sports people that have done their memoirs and stuff. If I can remember, it's ages ago now. So there's a couple different people that aren't actually actors that do it, but sometimes you kind of wonder why it had to be the celebrity, because sometimes they just aren't
They suck.
really great at narration, right?
Yeah.
They don't know what to,
Ugh.
they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So it's not like their fault. It's just
They're not narrators, right?
they're not narrators. They don't understand what it is to narrate a book. So yeah, that's kind of what I just want to talk about is what the appeal is. There's certainly going to be many more of them as time goes on. I think, because audiobooks are always trying to sell audiobooks, right?
Yeah,
Right.
and if there's a big name attached, it's naturally going to get more sales.
Naturally. And speaking of naturally,
Yeah.
if it's a memoir or whatever, you often just find the celebrity themselves narrating their own piece. But there's some caveats to that as well.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say.
Like what? What caveats?
Like ghostwriting. It's,
if there's
Yeah, like
ghostwriting, sometimes it might be helpful.
it's like
to,
my memoir, but somebody else wrote it. So I'm reading somebody else's writing still. You know what I mean?
it's kind of weird sometimes.
Right. I don't know. I feel like having the person who wrote the memoir, if it's an autobiography, it's great to hear that person's voice as well.
Yeah.
Even if
And I
the
think-
narration is subpar, I think they get
Yeah.
a pass.
Yeah, I
you get a
haven't
pass?
read.
Obama, I beg to differ.
What?
I couldn't get
You're
through
gonna
it.
diss Michelle
I'm
Obama?
so sorry. I wish I didn't have to.
I think you're gonna lose a whole bunch of listeners here.
I really wish not. I wish the people who agree with me would stand up and support, because I couldn't get through her book. Truly.
We'll have to listen to how she sounds when we get there, because we do
Yeah.
have some Michelle Obama.
Yeah,
I love her
absolutely.
voice. I love her speeches. I love her presentations. I just want to put that all out there. But I wish that she had read her book a little differently, or maybe it was the writing. Maybe it's not even about the
I
narration.
wonder. See, I don't know. I haven't read either of them, I must say.
Well, let's let the audience
Stand
judge
up.
for themselves. Let's listen to the clip. So this is The Light We Carry by Michelle Obama.
Sometimes you recognize a tool only after it starts working for you. And sometimes it turns out the smallest of tools can help us to sort through the largest of feelings. I learned this a couple of years ago when I mail-ordered myself some knitting needles without quite realizing what I needed them for. This was during the first fraught weeks of the pandemic, and I was in our house in Washington, D.C. I'd been online shopping in a scattershot way, laying in things like board games and art supplies on top of food and toilet paper, unsure of how anything would go, fully and sheepishly aware that impulse shopping is a classic American response to uncertainty.
It's coming back.
Wow.
The one I listened to was Becoming, by the way, not this one. But
Yeah.
yep.
Your judgment still stands.
Yep.
That, by the way, is published by Penguin Random House Audio, The Light We Carry by Michelle Obama.
So what do you specifically not like about it, Rams?
I feel like her reading is okay, but for a long book, for a long form listening piece, it was not dynamic enough for me.
Very dry, right?
Very.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I mean, as I say, I haven't read any of them, so I can't judge. But there's a lot of, we call it vocal fry going on, where it's just the way her voice works, and
Yeah.
because she's not a trained vocal user, it goes that way. So that can be a bit obnoxious for people who find that really annoying. It's where you sound like this sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. The
Yeah,
whole
where
way
it's,
through.
like, it's up in your throat instead of like low from the bottom of your lungs, right? From your diaphragm.
Yeah. So there's Rami's opinion of Michelle Obama.
Excuse me,
There
you
go.
guys definitely bandwagoned on that.
No, I understand what you're saying. I mean, that's kind of what I was sort of thinking about
Yeah.
when I was thinking about this. Is sometimes it can be, it's about the person and not about the skill of the narration. It's about the fact that she's narrating her own book, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's Michelle Obama,
Exactly,
cool."
exactly. And she writes
I'll buy
really
it.
well. She does.
Yeah.
It's just her reading of her writing just does. It feels very disconnected to me.
I'd like to point out that she's the only author of the 4 clips that we got here that wasn't a singer or an actor. So she hasn't
very
had
true.
that
Yeah,
vocal
that's true.
training, right? That's the common denominator here. And she's not good at narrating. I totally agree.
Okay. What else do you want to point out?
Let's get to another clip. This one is
Yeah.
from Tom Hanks, from his book that he wrote himself, The Making of Another Motion Picture Masterpiece.
A little over 5 years back, I had a message on my voicemail from one Al McTeer, which I heard as Al McTeer, from a number in the 310 area code. This no-nonsense woman asked me to call her back regarding a thin little memoir I had written called A Stairway Down to Heaven, about my years of tending bar in a small subterranean club that played live music way back in the 1980s. At the time, I was also sort of a freelance journalist in and around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I wrote movie reviews. These days, I teach creative writing, common literature, and film studies at Mount Chisholm College of the Arts in the hills of Montana. Bozeman is a gorgeous, if stark, drive away. I get very few voicemails from Los Angeles, California. My boss read your memoir, Ms. McTeer told me. He says you write like he thinks. Your boss is brilliant, I told her.
Instantly engaging, you know?
Yeah, I put him for narration in the Stephen King level of narration skill.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's
I
there.
tend to agree.
What?
Yes. Yes. I know
Stephen King
exact-
is as good an actor as Tom Hanks.
No, I don't say
no,
that.
no,
I'm saying a
pause.
narrator.
Narrator.
Narration.
Really?
We are only
No.
talking narration here. And I
And I-
agree with you.
It's engaging. It's not like,
It's not overly performative. But
well, some of his voices, he goes a little crazy with them.
does he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does go a
Does
bit
Stephen
crazy.
King do that? Okay. I don't
no,
think
he's
so.
less
Yeah.
that way.
But there's a personality. Like,
yeah, this
Yeah.
is a fictional book, by the way. So that's not Tom Hanks talking about Tom Hanks. He's talking about a character in the book. So that's another thing to just note. Also published by Penguin Random House Audio, of course. The Making of Another Motion Picture Masterpiece. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he's quite engaging. He just gets you into the story. I think there's possibly a bit of pacing, kind of funky stuff going on, but for the most part, it's okay. Like, it's cool. It's cool.
I don't mind. We're speeding it up anyway.
It's Tom
right?
Hanks.
It's Tom Hanks.
Well,
yeah.
I'm
like-
not one of those speed up people, but
Well, you wouldn't have to speed up this one. He does very well with the natural pace, I think. What's a
Yeah.
book you've recently read that you want to shout out a celebrity narrator on, or feel like they did well or didn't do well?
well, a long time ago, I read a book. One of these, I don't know if it's a signature. Audible does these signature performances, and it's like a celebrity narrating a classic book of literature. And I forget if this is what this was, but it was Tim Robbins narrating The Great Gatsby. And Tim Robbins is a director, and he's been an actor, I think, too. The book is hard to put. I mean, I think you can put life into it, but it's a bit of a difficult one to do. But I think it could have been more engagingly narrated than how he did it, in my opinion. It was just kind of, this is what I'm this is what I'm reading, and this is the next thing that I'm reading, and then I'm going to read this next. You know, it was just, it just seemed a little not quite, you know. But I'm picky. I don't know.
I think it's okay to be picky if we're just constantly getting audiobooks in our, feeds or in our habits, right? Like we consume audiobooks more than anything else. Maybe I'm speaking for everybody and I shouldn't be, but
I think around this table, yeah, that's fair to
yes,
say.
Exactly.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, celebrity or not, you almost, and I there are exceptions to this. Like, I get hyped when I have certain celebrities dropping memoirs, and then I know they're the ones narrating. But For the most part, we are looking for quality, and we are going to sit here and say, but yeah, she didn't do a great job narrating her thing. It's not just the novelty of this narrator, this celebrity being the narrator of the book.
But if you look at Neil Gaiman, who's a fantasy author, he's written books on mythology, lots of things. He does narrate a lot of his stuff because people have realized that he's got an awesome voice. He's done public reading. He does public readings all the time. And I don't know if he has acting experience. It almost sounds like to me he might have had some, because he's just got this way of just narrating something that takes you right into the story, whether it's his book or not. Julia Whelan, of course, narrates any book she writes. And she's actually said it's kind of hard to get into the narrator mode, having been a writer of the same book, because you're like, oh, look, I did that wrong, and that one didn't get edited the way it should have, and I have to just narrate it as though it's not.
Critic. Yeah.
She criticizes herself a lot.
Any creative will know that sometimes it's difficult to go back through your own works, whether that's like listening back to your own music, reading your own poetry, reading your own books. It can be tricky. And imagine having to read your entire book back at yourself, and then probably listen back to yourself reading your own book.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't.
No.
Oh my God.
Get to another sample, yeah?
Okay.
Which one do you want to do? We have two left.
We can do the Bono. I haven't even listened to the Bono one. So this is called Surrender by Bono from U2, published by Penguin Random House Audio. Goodness.
I was born with an eccentric heart. In one of the chambers of my heart, where most people have 3 doors, I have 2. 2 swinging doors, which on Christmas 2016 were coming off their hinges. The aorta is your main artery, your lifeline, carrying the blood, oxygenated by your lungs, and becoming your life. But we have discovered that my aorta has been stressed over time and developed a blister that's about to burst, which will put me in the next life faster than I can make an emergency call, faster than I can say goodbye to this life.
See,
What a cliffhanger.
it's hard to judge this one
Yeah.
because we only get internal monologue, right? Like, I want to hear some dialogue. I want to hear how I feel about it after listening to it for 4 hours.
And I don't know how that'll be, but I mean, for one thing, it's Bono, and
Yeah.
wow, man,
I love his voice.
Irish accent
My
and
God.
all this
Yeah,
stuff.
cool voice.
But yeah, and aneurysm, right? Wow,
I
crazy.
know. See, that's the other thing. Like, the content is so believable when he reads it. And I think that, you make a good point, Jacob, about dialogue and it just knowing where they can go with their voice, I guess. But if you're just talking about, as this person reads, are you paying attention to what they're saying, or are you sitting there going, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can listen to this for this long? And it didn't take me long to actually just start paying attention to the content. Because there is that phase, right, where you're going, am I going to like this? Okay. That's what happened with Michelle Obama. For that whole clip, I was like, oh dear. What is she talking about now?
I need to adjust.
Yeah, I need to adjust.
Wow.
Whereas with Bono, immediately, I don't know if it's just the content or his delivery was so smooth about with the content.
So, celebrity narrators, celebrities are generally pretty good with their voices. And people who get tapped to do audiobooks will also generally have very nice voices, because across the board, they always choose audiobook narrators that have nice voices. Okay, great. But it's more than just having a nice voice.
Exactly.
Like, you need to be able to enunciate properly. Maybe even do some voices if you want to do more engaging
Technically,
read.
you have to enunciate, but that's okay.
Enunciate? What did I say?
You said enunciate.
Enunciate? Oh my God.
You're an English major, I
I'll
hear?
see myself out.
Please.
But yeah, you have to enunciate properly. You have to prepare yourself, prepare the book, know if it's characters, know the characters, know how they interact, that kind of stuff. And that takes experience.
It takes experience. I used to work with interpreters, and they always said that when you want to interpret something to do the best job possible, you need to fundamentally understand what is being said. You can't just translate words and say it out loud. When you're narrating an audiobook, you're interpreting what's on the page, right? So you need to be able to be a very good reader and understand the subtext and what's really going on to be able to give a proper, good narration.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that comes with experience that these professional narrators are going to do that maybe don't have the clout that celebrity narrators have, but they definitely have that advantage.
It's not like all celebrities do their own narration either. They don't. I mean, so there's a lot of autobiographies out there that are narrated by professional narrators.
Probably for the better.
Yeah, because and a lot of times some of the people I've profiled, they've said, "Oh yeah, I worked with, Mick Jagger to narrate, whatever book it was or whatever, that kind of things." Like I talked to him about his life and, learned about him and tried to get into the mode of that person without doing their voice or whatever, but just try to, get into their head a little bit.
Let's end on one more sample.
Yeah, let's end best for last. This is Behind the Seams by Dolly Parton.
Behind the Seams, My Life in Rhinestones, tells the stories behind some of my favorite outfits, both on and off stage. It also paints a picture of the evolution of my own personal style that I first developed growing up in the backwoods of East Tennessee. I always loved makeup. I wanted to be pretty. Back then, any woman who wore makeup in the mountains was considered trashy. But I didn't care. When I started buying my own makeup, I also started dressing according to how I felt, which meant wearing tight, low-cut outfits that my mama made. Now, I remember feeling powerful enough to go up against my daddy or my grandpa to say, "Now that ain't that tight. That ain't that low-cut. It ain't that much." And they'd say, "Yes, it is," but I'd be willing to get my butt whooped for it.
Oh, my God.
Oh, there you go.
Dolly, wow.
Dolly Parton, that's again published by Penguin Random House Audio, Behind the Seams. You gotta love
may
Dolly
as well
Parton.
be just sitting here with us, honestly.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Sarah, you're the best. Thank you. We'll catch up next month.
Yeah.
Sarah Hill is joining us for Know Your Narrator. We were getting into celebrity narrators. Let's take a quick look at the CELA homepage before we go. Go to CELAlibrary.ca for the whole catalog of books they got up there. 3 featured titles are The Fury by Alex Michaelides, suspense and thriller title. Unbroken by Angela Starrett, and this is Indigenous Peoples in Canada, Canadian biography. The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, serious and literary fiction. That's it, Jacob. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're talking about titles because, listen, titles can be super misleading. They can be cringy. They can be really over the top. And let's not lie to ourselves. We've all passed on a book because it has a stupid title.
Yep.
We judge books by their cover, okay?
That's not changing anytime soon.
Yeah, that's not changing anytime soon. So we're having Amar Khan come on to help us break down what makes a good title. It's going to be a silly conversation because we have a giant list of stupid freaking titles that are really cringe.
So looking forward to it. We've been adding on this list for a while. Call us with your comments, 1-866-509-4545. Email us at feedback@ami.ca. That's it for this week. You're joining us, Ramya Amudan, Jacob Szymanski, Nasreen Abdel-Majid on AMI Audiobook Review. And until next time, happy audiobook listening.